Friends, something extremely bizarre just happened on Wall Street. 9 mysterious accounts used $12 million in a U.S. online brokerage to buy 200,000 shares of what was basically worthless paper. 48 hours later, that so-called worthless paper actually turned into over $100 million. The return rate for those 9 accounts exceeded 900%. This is a real event that just happened. This time, the unlucky bag holder was none other than Wall Street's biggest and most established financial giant, Hainan International. This is the largest options market maker on Wall Street, and its co-founder is a top Wall Street tycoon worth over $90 billion, someone who's seen it all. But even they suffered a direct loss of $71,400,000 in this squeeze. When Hainan International traced these trades all the way back, they discovered that at the exact same time this group of mysterious people was precisely shorting, on the other side of the Pacific, the Chinese authorities were actually preparing a severe crackdown on Futu and Tiger Brokers. What connection do these mysterious people who suddenly appeared have with the power elite far away in Beijing? How did they skillfully use Wall Street's free market rules to turn a policy-level secret into over $100 million across borders? Believe me, the level of intrigue in this case is truly textbook material for financial crime. So before we get started, I'd like to ask you all for a small favor. To help more people see this episode, please give me a like, and if you're new here, welcome to True Perspective. Please subscribe. This will help me trigger YouTube's algorithm and get this episode recommended to more people. Before we get into the story, we first need to introduce a financial concept. Once you understand this concept, the story will make a lot more sense. This thing is called a put option. You can think of it as a contract that lets you bet on a price drop. For example, let's say Apple stock is currently $180 per share. At this point, you go to Wall Street and find a firm called Hainan International. This company is like a giant supermarket in the financial market. Whatever kind of financial product you want to buy or sell, as long as you name your price, they have to open their doors and do business with you at any time, no questions asked. But the money they make isn't from the ups and downs of the product's price, it's from people like you. Every player who enters pays a transaction fee. So once you're inside this giant supermarket called Hainan International, you tell them, hey, I'll spend $1 to buy a contract from you. This contract says that within the next 3 days, if Apple's stock price falls below $150, then you, Hainan International, must buy my Apple shares from me at $150. Hainan International, hearing you say this, would definitely think, hey, are you out of your mind? Apple is doing just fine. It's even worth trillions. How could its stock price possibly drop 20% for no reason at all in just 3 days? So Hainan International figured, well, in the end, this contract definitely won't work out. It'll just be a worthless piece of paper. So they happily welcomed you as a client, took your $1 in costs, and signed the contract with you. But what if, within those 3 days, you actually managed to predict something big would happen, and the stock price really crashed down to $100? At that point, the contract you bought for $1 would turn into real money. You could buy Apple shares on the market at the current price of $100 per share, and then, according to the terms of the contract, force Hainan International to buy back the Apple shares from you at $150 per share. So with this buy and sell, you'd make a pure profit of $50 per share, even though you only spent $1 on the contract. Earning $50 back is a 50-fold profit. That's the magic of a put option. This product is like a lottery ticket in the financial markets. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, it's just worthless paper. But if you hit the jackpot, the returns can be dozens or even hundreds of times your investment. But when you play with these low probability lottery tickets, there are 3 harsh rules you have to face. First, the shorter the time frame, the harder it is. Winning the lottery means the shorter the time you bet on the price dropping, the harder it is to win. Second, the more you bet on a steep drop, the harder it is to win as well. Third, if the price doesn't fall to the number you bet on, the contract will immediately become worthless when it expires. In the end, not only do you not make any money, but you also lose your principal. Now, this giant company, HNA International, usually makes steady profits on Wall Street by relying on this kind of sure-win strategy. They use supercomputers to calculate the probabilities. As long as you don't win this lottery, they can steadily pocket the money you spent buying the ticket. Now, friends, you all understand this logic. In the financial markets, if someone dares to suddenly throw down real money and buy a bunch of lottery tickets that look impossible to win just hours before expiration, then those people are either crazy or they know some insider information. But what kind of insider could predict a company's rise or fall? Or even predict the exact amount it will drop so accurately? Let's move to May 7th of this year. At 9:30 in the morning Eastern Time in Manhattan, New York, David, the head of the options trading desk at Heine International, was sitting in front of hundreds of screens flashing red and green numbers. As usual, he sipped his coffee and glanced at the opening orders. Suddenly, his eyes locked onto one of the columns. On the screen, the trading volume for short-term put options of Futu holdings had suddenly skyrocketed. This was just absurd. At the time, Futu's stock price was around $120 and had been trading sideways for 3 months. Its fundamentals were rock solid, and the first quarter earnings report was off the charts. How could anyone bet big money that such a promising company would drop below $100 within 9 days? David glanced at it and didn't pay much attention. He figured it was probably just some clueless retail investor trying to be clever. Orders like this were basically just handing money over to Heine International. As the market maker, they'd happily pocket the premium. But he was wrong. Over the next 14 days, the trading volume for the same type of put options surged like a floodgate had opened. Each day, the growth was more explosive than the last. David sensed something was seriously off and immediately sent his team to investigate. The back-end data they pulled up made everyone on the trading floor break out in goosebumps. This data was later included in the indictment. On May 7th, 87% of all the money buying Futu put options in the entire market was concentrated in just 3 brokerages: Interactive Brokers, Tiger Brokers, and Futu Securities itself. In other words, Futu itself was actually buying put options on its own company. How could this happen? But that's not all. A week later, on May 13th, another giant, Tiger Brokers, also saw a mysterious influx of funds buying its put options, and 98% of those purchases came from the same 3 brokerages. On Wall Street, this is called clubbing together, which means that all the buyers betting on these 2 companies to crash are actually concentrated within a very small circle. David, look at how pale his assistant looks as he hands him a consolidated receipt. One of the 3 brokerages that bought in large quantities, Interactive Brokers, has over 5 million client accounts across the US, but all the orders to buy put options on Tiger and Futu were actually concentrated in just a few accounts. Out of a brokerage with 5 million users, only 9 users were making this type of trade. 9 out of 5 million, statistically, that's even more unbelievable than winning the lottery 5 times in a row. The later indictment mentioned an even stranger scene. At 1:30 p.m. on May 21st, the trading windows of these 3 brokerages suddenly saw a surge of concentrated buy orders for 6 specific options within just a few minutes, 4 for Tiger and 2 for Futu. The speed and rhythm of these orders made it seem like 6 ghosts all hit the enter key at the exact same second. This was definitely not the work of retail investors, but rather an organized, well-planned, multinational hunting group with a shared source of information. David broke out in a cold sweat. He realized this wasn't speculation. Someone had gotten their hands on the kind of top-secret information that could completely change their fate. Top-secret information. Before we continue with this story, let me ask you a question. Who do you think is the real source of information behind these 9 mysterious accounts? If you think it's an insider from the China Securities Regulatory Commission using policy for personal gain, type an A for me. If you think it's a senior executive from Futu or Tiger Brokers, type a B. If you think it's a middleman between these 2 groups, type a C. Or if you have a completely different opinion, leave a comment and let me know your choice in the comments section. Remember your choice for now. After you finish this story, come back and tell me if you guessed right. But at that time, Heine International was powerless in the face of such intentions. Why is that? Because according to US law, as a market maker, which is like a big supermarket in the financial market, Heine International has to accept any order placed. They can't refuse any customer who wants to buy, even if they suspect the customer is an insider peeking at the cards. So David could only grit his teeth and watch helplessly as the contracts in the system were continuously sold to this group of hidden players lurking in the shadows at prices of just $1 or $2 each. He just didn't know that there were only 24 hours left before a thunderbolt would strike from the other side of the Pacific. On the afternoon of May 21st, these were the final hours before this batch of put option insurance policies expired. Remember what we mentioned earlier? When you buy a put option, it has to be within a set time frame. For example, if you're betting the price will drop, it has to fall below a certain point within 3 or 9 days. There's always a deadline. At this moment, the atmosphere in front of the Hainan International Trading Desk was oppressively tense. Because that group of mysterious accounts not only hadn't stopped, but were actually going even crazier, going all in. They were selling off the last batch of put options completely. According to records from the later indictment, on May 21st alone, these 9 mysterious accounts snapped up 55% of all short-term future put options and 89% of all Tiger put options in the entire US market. This went on for 2 weeks. Altogether, these people hoarded over 50,000 Futu put options and more than 150,000 Tiger put options, totaling over 200,000 put options. They put up a total of $12 million. $12 million to bet on a crash that, at the time, seemed completely impossible to happen within 9 days. If they were wrong, after that day, all that money would just go down the drain. But if they were right, it would be an extreme windfall, a 100-fold return. At this point, there were only a few hours left until the U.S. stock market closed at 4 p.m. David stared intently at the clock on the screen. Every time the minute hand ticked forward, his heart beat a little faster. For Susquehanna International, this was a life or death race against time. As long as they could make it past 4 p.m. that day, when the closing bell rang, the most aggressive portion of this massive batch of options contracts would expire on the spot, worthless, because the price hadn't dropped to the bet level. At that moment, the $12 million would go straight into Susquehanna International's pocket, and this bizarre crisis would naturally resolve itself with the passage of time. The entire trading floor was eerily quiet, with only the constant clatter of keyboards breaking the silence. David's compliance department had joined an emergency meeting, and his deputy whispered a reminder. David grabbed the phone, his voice full of anxiety. "This is definitely insider trading, almost 100% certain. Can we suspend accepting orders from these brokerages?" There was a few seconds of silence on the other end of the line. Then the reply came, "David, according to U.S. financial law, we're market makers. We don't have the right to refuse any legitimate order. Then make a top-level physical backup of all your trading data immediately. If something really goes wrong, we'll go to port." At the same time, the people behind those 9 anonymous accounts were also watching the countdown clock on their screens. They knew very well that all the bets had been pushed to the center of the table. The only thing they had to do now was make it through these last few hours of the afternoon on the US East Coast. As long as dawn broke on the other side of the Pacific on the morning of May 22nd, Beijing time, the official document stamped by 8 Chinese government departments would be released. It would officially take effect. At exactly 4 p.m., when the closing bell of the New York Stock Exchange rang crisply over Manhattan, the day on Wall Street officially came to an end, and the red and green numbers on the screens froze in place. David let out a long sigh and walked out of the company building, looking a bit tired. By then, the lights in New York had just come on, and he thought the most dangerous moment had already passed. But he didn't know that on the other side of the Pacific, the sun was slowly rising. 3 hours later, without any warning, a notice appeared on the official website of the China Securities Regulatory Commission. It was an announcement regarding the regulation of mainland investors' cross-border securities, futures, and fund operations. Immediately after, a blow powerful enough to destroy the entire industry struck. 8 departments, including the CSRC, the Ministry of Public Security, and the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, jointly announced that they had officially launched investigations into Futu, Tiger Brokers, and Longbridge Securities, and imposed a heavy fine of 1.85 billion yuan on Futu. Tiger Brokers was fined and had 410 million yuan confiscated. At 9:16 a.m. Eastern Time, still reeling from the shock, Tiger Brokers urgently submitted this death notice to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's filing system. At 9:26, Futu also sounded the bell for the 9:30 opening of the U.S. stock market, right on time. Futu opened at $81.08, a gap down of 34.5% from the previous day's closing price, while Tiger dropped 31% compared to its previous close. In the trading hall of Hala International in New York, Dowie stared at the screen, unable to say a single word. He knew it was all over. At this moment, those short-dated put options that had been sold off in the past few days had become winning lottery tickets, their value increasing 30-fold, 50-fold, or even 100-fold. In just a few hours, the holdings of those 9 anonymous accounts across the Pacific soared from $12 million to over $100 million. Meanwhile, as the largest counterparty, Hainan International woke up to find that this cross-border assault had wiped $71.4 million straight off their books. This wasn't a financial prediction, but a bloody heist executed with microsecond precision under the cover of international time differences. Why do we call this a well-planned, organized cross-border financial massacre? Because the indictment revealed an even more chilling detail. Not only did this group buy massive amounts of put options, but they also specifically chose the expiration dates for those options. They calculated everything with precision. 31% of the options they bought were set to expire exactly the day after the Chinese Communist Party announced the heavy penalties for Futu and Tiger, and 35% of the options were set to expire in the week following the announcement of the penalties. In other words, not only did they know in advance that Futu and Tiger would be in trouble, they even knew exactly when the authorities would make the announcement. They knew everything inside out. They were holding the trump card of the authorities' actions, then watched the clock count down, and in the final 24 hours before the incident, they precisely invested $12 million to buy this sure-win lottery ticket with a famous name. Let me give you a specific example from the indictment. On May 20th, Futu's stock price was still at $124. A mysterious account placed an order to buy a Futu put option with a strike price of $102.45. The expiration date was May 29th. How much did he pay for it? One contract cost $1.50. So how much could he make from this trade in a month? Let's do the math. On May 22nd, after the CCP announced heavy penalties, Futu's stock price dropped to $81.08. According to the rules of put options, no matter how much the market drops, Hainan International must buy the client's shares at the strike price of $102.45. At this point, this mysterious person can buy Futu shares on the market at the current price of $81.08, then immediately present the contract to Hainan International and require them to buy the shares at the much higher price of $102.45. With this move, he makes a profit of $21.37 per share. Since in the U.S. stock options market, one options contract corresponds to 100 shares, that means with just one contract, he can make $2,137. After subtracting the $1.50 premium he paid to buy the contract, he nets a pure profit of $1,987 per contract. The indictment mentions that this group accumulated more than 50,000 put options contracts within 2 weeks, as shown in the attached chart. If he bought 10,000 contracts at this price, he would have made $19.87 million, which is about 140 million RMB. These 9 mysterious people calculated everything so precisely. They took into account the time difference across the Pacific, the information gap between the U.S. East Coast and Beijing, the lengthy investigation process of the U.S. SEC, and the loophole that there is no judicial assistance agreement between China and the U.S. With calculations this precise, how extensive do you think their network? And how much courage would it take to pull this off? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think they really are? I really want to know what you think. But what they never expected, despite all their careful planning, was that in the face of this heist, Hainan International would never just swallow their anger and let it go. On June 29th, 38 days had passed since Futu and Tiger were cracked down on. During these 38 days, Hainan International's quantitative legal compliance team canceled all vacations, working around the clock. They pulled up every detail of those 200,000 options contracts, the trading timestamps, IP addresses, account numbers, every login, every fund transfer, everything, and ran a high-level big data analysis. After 38 days of cross-analysis, they submitted a 30-page indictment to the Manhattan Federal District Court. In the indictment, Hainan International pointed out that there are only 2 possible sources of the leak, either core staff within the Chinese Securities Regulatory Commission who had access to confidential information, or senior executives within Futu or Tiger who were aware of and involved in communications with the Regulatory Commission. Hainan International's lawyers also cited Article 51 of China's securities law, noting that commission staff are insiders banned from trading or leaking confidential information. This is almost like directly pointing the finger at the Chinese regulatory system. That same afternoon, a judge from the Southern District Court of New York urgently approved Hainan International's motion, freezing all the accused accounts on the 3 platforms, Interactive Brokers, Futu, and Tiger. The court also allowed Hainan International to issue subpoenas to these 3 brokerages, compelling them to hand over the real identity information of the account holders, as well as imposing a critical threshold. If those accounts involved in the case and frozen want to appear in court to defend themselves at the July 10th hearing, they must pay a $100,000 bond. And the moment they pay the bond, they are required to submit their real identity. This series of moves accomplishes two things. First, it locks the money in the United States. No matter what, the other party can't take a single cent out. Second, it sets a trap, forcing the mastermind behind the scenes to take off their own mask. Now, this group of mysterious people has to face a single choice question. Either they back down and give up more than $100 million, in which case their names might not be made public for now, but the $12 million they bet over the past 2 weeks will go down the drain. If they want to get back that $100 million, then they have to pay a $100,000 court admission fee to defend themselves in court. But to buy that ticket, they have to personally hand over their Chinese ID and passport to the American judge. This way, the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI, who have been watching closely from the sidelines, will finally know exactly who is behind the crime. On July 3rd, Bloomberg revealed two more important pieces of news. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has already launched an investigation into this case, and the Criminal Division of the U.S. Department of Justice has also gotten involved. The case is now escalated from a civil matter to a potential criminal case. There's more to come with this case. Will this group of people choose the money or their lives? Will the masterminds behind the scenes be named in a U.S. court? What will happen next? This case could even impact the Chinese Communist Party's regulatory system. Subscribe to True Perspective and turn on notifications. We'll keep following this major transnational financial case to its final outcome together. This case really happened. All the details I just mentioned are disclosed in the indictment. The final outcome of this case is something we'll have to wait and see. All right, that's all for today. Friends, if you enjoyed my show, don't forget to give me a like before you leave. If you're new, welcome to subscribe to True Perspective, and feel free to share my videos with more friends. Every interaction from you helps trigger YouTube's recommendation algorithm for me. Let my hard work be seen by more people. So I want to thank everyone in advance. All right, I wish you all a great weekend. We'll meet again at the same time tomorrow on True Perspective. Don't miss it. Bye-bye.